Okay, so look at what we have here. We have the first generation iPad, we've got the iPad 2, and we've got the new iPad. Is it worth to upgrade from any of these? Let's find out. If you've never owned a tablet in the past, it's kind of a no-brainer to go for the new generation iPad. It's the only tablet that we've ever given 5 stars out of 5 in a review, so read the link in the description for details on why. But how about if you're coming from the second generation iPad and you want to upgrade? Or how about if you come from the first generation iPad and you're thinking about upgrade? Or how about if you're considering that the iPad 2 is now in the market for $100 less than the new iPad? Which is better to buy or keep? Let's find out with a comparison. Trying to film 3 tablets at the same time is kind of crazy, so bear with me here. We've got the first generation iPad here at the right, the iPad 2 at the left, and we've got the new iPad here in the middle. Other than that, the devices don't really vary. We've got the same 9.7-inch display here, 9.7-inch display here, and 9.7-inch display here. What varies here is the resolution. We've got 1024 down by 768 on both the first generation iPad and the second generation iPad, but things vary because we go to 2048 by 1536 on the third generation iPad. Both these devices have 132 pixels per inch, and then this one's got a whopping 264 pixels per inch. The first generation iPad had the first single core A4 chip with normal graphics. This iPad 2 has got dual core graphics and the A5 chips. This iPad 2 was 9 times faster in graphics than the first generation iPad alone. And then the third generation iPad has got quad-core graphics, which is actually pretty much 4 times, or we could say twice, as much as the second generation iPad. So both these devices are dual-core devices, don't be mistaken by that. But aside from that, this device has no cameras. This device has terrible cameras. VGA here, and then at the back it could barely give you 720p resolution on this camera. And then here we've got the same VGA camera up front, but then we've got a 5 megapixel camera at the back with the optics of the iPhone 4S, which are quite legendary. So you can film 720p video here, and you can film 1080p here. You can do FaceTime here on this one, FaceTime here, no FaceTime on the first generation iPad. So if video is your thing, definitely the first generation iPad should be out of your league. Now, all these devices have 802.11n. These two devices have Bluetooth 2.1 EDR, but this one has the new generation Bluetooth 4.0, which you could find in the iPhone 4S and then also in the new generation MacBook Airs. And then aside from that, the other differences are pretty much minor. Now, if we talked about ergonomics, if you look at them from the front, there's really no big difference unless you try to really be nitpicky about the size, because the first generation iPad was 9.56 inches tall and 7.47 inches wide in comparison to the second and third generation iPads, which were both 9.50 inches tall and 7.31 inches wide. It's a very minor difference. Now, where things change is in the thickness, because the first generation iPad was 0.50 inches thick. The second generation iPad was 0.34 inches thick, and then the third generation iPad is 0.37 inches. You pretty much can't notice that these are thicker, that the third generation iPad is thicker than the second, but you'll notice that you definitely, the first generation iPad just dwarfs each of these devices. If we would compare weight, the first generation iPad for me was probably the most uncomfortable of them all. It was the heaviest one at 1.5 pounds. It had these borders here that just made it so uncomfortable to hold at some point that if you didn't have a case, things would just be, I don't know, they were just complicated. Now, if we grab the second generation iPad, this one weighed 1.33 pounds, and I'm trying to get rid of that. 1.33 pounds here if you went for the Wi-Fi model, and then if you went for the Wi-Fi plus 3G model, the difference was very minor. But for me, the second generation iPad was probably the best in weight. Somehow Apple didn't make a big difference in weight, but they somehow figured out weight distribution, because this device is extremely light. You can hold it in any way. You can hold it this way, for example, and you don't feel that it's hurting your arm at some point for holding it this way. Now, if you would try to do the same thing with the third generation iPad, things change. Sadly, the third generation iPad is 1.46 pounds in comparison to the other devices. It's lighter than the first generation iPad, obviously, but it's only a couple of ounces in comparison to the second generation iPad. So far, I've got to tell you, you do feel an extra weight in the third generation iPad. And I feel that, again, it has to do with weight distribution. They had to fit a much larger battery in this device if you compare it to the second generation iPad. So if ergonomics is a thing for you, and if you're looking looking for the lightest tablet out in the market that's still being sold, it would be the second generation iPad. Let's talk about performance now. The first, second, and third generation iPad are all certified for 10 hours of battery life, though. This is a 25 and 25 watt-hour battery, and this has a whopping 42 watt-hour battery just to power the Retina display. So this device I just pulled out of the box, but it's been working for almost an hour that I've been filming this. It's already got 99% battery life. We've got 96% on the iPad 2 and 93% on the first generation iPad. Now bear in mind this is a 2-year-old device, 1-year-old device, and this is a brand new device. These devices are all certified to give you like 5,000 cycles out of the box, so that's pretty much 5 years of battery life, but you could expect some sort of degradation. Still, you still get the certified 10 hours of battery, but the problem here is that because this battery is so much bigger, all these devices ship with the same 10 watt chargers, so it'll take these devices 3 hours to charge, and it'll take this one 7 whopping hours to charge. It'll take you 10 hours to discharge it, then from 0 to 100 it'll take you 6 to 7 hours to charge it again. Totally defeats the purpose. You're probably going to have to be carrying a charger or something all the time, which makes it kind of uncomfortable, but let's try some performance. These devices they're all not running any applications in the background. We're going to try to launch Safari at the same time. It was preloaded with PocketNow.com before, so it should launch the website again. Let's try to do this at the same time, though it's going to be kind of complicated. The iPad 2 went first. We've still got gearboxes here, it's still loading. The first generation iPad hasn't even loaded the sidebar. Oh, the third generation iPad is already done. Second generation iPad is still loading things at the bottom. Let's try to move things here to the bottom. First generation iPad, well, PocketNow.com is loaded fast on each of these, but sadly, the first generation iPad is a lot slower. The gearbox is still rolling here on the first generation iPad if you compare it to the other devices. Now let's do a comparison with games, and Infinity Blade 2 was a game that was launched for the iPad 2 and optimized for dual-core graphics, but it could still run on the first generation iPad, though you'll notice that things aren't the same even though you can run it here. And then we've got the third generation iPad, which this game was recently optimized for Retina display graphics. So let's try to run the game at the same time. It's going to be kind of complicated, but good thing I have big hands. Let's try to do it at the same time. Here we go. And by the way, the third generation iPad has got stunning sound. Sorry about that, I didn't put the sound down, but these two devices are running at the same time. This one's slower, but then you'll notice a little bit of a difference here. Launching logos, all is going well, but we've got one introduction here, both running at the same time, the same introduction. This introduction hasn't even launched, but let's see it loading. Notice that the introduction here launches at a different time, at a different pace, and then because this device doesn't have the same graphics power as these, and it's not dual core, you'll notice that here you don't have sound support as you do here eventually. It'll take a little longer for these to get here, but let's have them run. You'll notice that there are subtitles here because this device can't run the sound because it doesn't have the extra processor as what these do. So let's see these load. You can see the same leaves falling here, same leaves falling. We've got audio support here. Both audios are going at the same time. Here you only have, again, you only have subtitles.
Now every deathless in the world is going to come hunting you for that blade. I'll find someone to help me.
Graphics are good. Remember that the first game that's going to take advantage of these graphics is going to be Infinity Blade Dungeons, which is going to be available soon. Not available yet, so both devices are running this game really well so far.
I did.
Now, an interesting note about streaming is the fact that these devices, this one has 256 megabytes of RAM, 512 megabytes of RAM, and 1 gigabyte of RAM. What makes a difference here is that this device buffered this 1080p video once, and it won't buffer it again. This one took a little while to buffer, and this one is still halfway, and it won't buffer anymore. So this has a lot to do with the way that the device handles video performance when launching. So let's try to launch this video at the same time to look at color quality. I'm trying to stretch my hands here. Let's see. Sorry about that. It's kind of hard to do this at the same time. It's kind of crazy to try to review a tablet, 3 tablets at the same time, but Notice the color qualities on these three devices. They're all handling colors and screen brightness at the same time, but even though the third generation iPad has warmer colors, it handles this 1080p video without lag at all. No lag here on the iPad 2, obviously. The third generation iPad is lagging now because its RAM doesn't allow it to buffer any more videos. So you'll notice that it's still struggling to buffer it again. If I would try to pull this back, it'll delete everything from the buffer and start again from scratch on the first generation iPad. And here it's buffering again, notice, but I have to play the video again. Now, how do these three devices handle photos? Well, we have the same 18 megapixel photo taken from the same DSLR from the Nokia Lumia 900 back at MWC. So this one is, the second generation iPad is cooler than even the first generation and the third generation iPad. But I noticed that the third generation iPad handles blacks a lot better than the other devices that are being compared. Now, for some reason, the rendering engine on either of these iPads doesn't do a really good job at handling zooming, and we notice the same problem with the iPhone 4S at the same time. Now, I'm going to try to show you something that's kind of hard to show on camera, so bear with me here. Are Retina display graphics worth it for the third generation iPad? Well, it's kind of a mixed bag because the third generation iPad does a better job at handling text than any of these devices. If you try to zoom in on this text though, you'll notice that text looks just as well on these three devices once zoomed in. The only difference is notice whenever you pull out from a website, where you will notice pixels and a little sort of like grainy show up for text on these two devices, whereas on the third generation iPad, colors just pop, things look amazing. But there's a very big problem here. See, websites are not optimized to handle Retina display graphics. Even though the iPad does a good job at doing this with text, it can't do it with imagery. So again, where do the Retina display graphics kick in? They kick in when you're zoomed out, but still, certain images when zoomed out on the third generation iPad look grainy. The problem is that the Retina display is beautiful, it's gorgeous, but for anything else that's not text, you really can't notice the difference yet. So now the bottom line is definitely a tough call. If you've never owned a tablet or you're coming from the iPad 1, definitely. Either iPad 2 or iPad 3 are miles ahead of the first generation iPad. The second generation iPad is $100 cheaper, and it'll give you certain things that are even better than the third generation iPad, like for example, how thick it is, and obviously that it's lighter, and obviously that it can handle performance almost just as well, with the advantage that you won't take 7 hours to charge it. As opposed to the third generation iPad, where there are a lot of technologies that are sadly not there yet. First of all, battery technology is not there yet. They had to make the device thicker and actually a little bit heavier. And obviously charging technology is not there. You have to wait 7 hours for it to charge. But other than that, I feel that websites are going to evolve in the future to support Retina display graphics. It's not there yet, but it will happen because Android tablets are now going to try to compete with this Retina display. They're going to try to bring even better resolutions in here, so websites need to be optimized, apps need to be optimized, software needs to be optimized. Everything is happening from now on, and the third generation iPad would pretty much be future-proof. You'd already own a device for $100 more that'll already be prepared to support what's coming in the future. So in my way of seeing it, I'd go for the third generation iPad just because I have the latest and greatest. But again, if you're on a tight budget, the second generation iPad is no slouch. This is it for our comparison video of the third generation iPad with the old generation models. We hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to give us a thumbs up if you like what you saw. This is Jaime Rivera from PocketNow.com. Thank you very much for watching.